Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining today. I'm Amy Charette, Drought Programs Coordinator for OWEB. I'd like to let you know that we are recording, like I mentioned, this webinar, and we will be putting it on the OWEB YouTube channel, as well as on the OWEB website after this meeting. We're going to be taking any questions that you have today. If you could please use the chat function for questions. We have several OWEB staff on the call that will be helping with questions and may add additional information into the discussion as well. Questions will be helpful to us as we understand what concerns you may have, and we'll put together a fact sheet from today that will also be available on the website. And I'll stop a couple of times during the presentation to check for any questions. So we're here this morning to go through background information and guidance documents for the Klamath off-channel livestock watering grant offering. We'll walk through some of the different documents that we have available and get any questions that you may have. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And this is the Gov delivery email that OWEB sent out last week. This is the web version of that, but you probably saw this in your email. And a couple of points from this message that I wanted to go through. During the 2021 special session, the legislator provided general funds to support drought relief efforts. And one of those efforts is this Klamath off-channel livestock watering grant. General funds are a funding source that OWEB does not normally have and has special consideration. OWEB has a little over $2.7 million available for this grant offering, with specific legislative intent to provide grants for livestock watering wells and construction of off-channel water facilities in Klamath County. The purpose of this grant is to help defer costs for landowners to move livestock watering facilities away from riparian areas, minimizing grazing impacts and the dependency on in-stream water sources. So we opened the first grant cycle on May 31st last week. The deadline is June 30th at 5 p.m. And we also anticipate at least one more grant cycle, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. This Gov delivery email also highlights actions eligible for funding, and these are specific to the legislative intent and include well construction, initial power hookups and associated infrastructure like pumps, piping, troughs, and cisterns, project design for both well construction and off-channel watering infrastructure, riparian fencing. Full exclusion fencing is not required, but strongly encouraged. And if full exclusion is not included, per the legislative intent, the applicant will need to have a strong grazing management plan that outlines how grazing will be managed to limit impacts to the riparian area. Modest costs are available for riparian planting and non-native plant control, but this is not intended to be a primary source of funding. And the development of a grazing management plan is also eligible for funding. This Gov delivery email also highlights eligible applicants. Very similar to regular OWEB grant cycles, includes tribes, watershed councils, soil and water conservation districts, and nonprofits. Other organizations are listed there. And state and federal agencies are not allowed to apply for funding, but may apply as a co-applicant to one of the other eligible entities. So from here, oh yeah, I can make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to go to our webpage, which is linked in that email. This is the drought relief webpage. All of the drought programs are listed here. Some are still under development, but the information is available for the Klamath off-channel livestock watering grant. So I'm going to spend most of the time going over these two documents, but I wanted to highlight the grant cycle offerings here. Like we mentioned, the current cycle is open now and closes on June 30th. OWEB strongly recommends that applicants submit their grant applications at least 24 hours prior to the deadline so that you have time to correct any errors that are found during the verification process. We're planning a second cycle to open mid-July and close September 1st. And if funding is still available after that second cycle, then we plan to open a third cycle in November. So the first document I'm going to touch on is linked here first. It's the program overview and guidance document. I'll make this a little bit bigger. This also talks about kind of background, introduction, and legislative intent and program structure. The eligible area is all of Klamath County, and eligible project activities may date back to July 1st of 2021. So if you have an ongoing project or a recently completed project, it still could be eligible for funding if project activities have taken place after July 1st. For timing of these designated general funds, we have a short time frame on this. All project components must be completed by June 30th of 2023, so next year, a little over a year. OWEB is currently working to request authority from the Oregon legislature to extend the lifespan of these funds. We do understand the complexity of these projects and the current shortage of well drillers and the difficulties that you may face in getting these projects completed. So if we're able to extend the funding through the next biennium, it would extend the date 2 years. Funds will still need to be obligated in a grant agreement by June 30th of 2023. And there is space in the application for you to describe what you may complete by that date and any timing or implementation challenges that you're expecting. We do ask for, in the application, a description of how projects are identified and prioritized. We've listed both the Upper Klamath Basin Watershed Action Plan and the Oregon DEQ Integrated Report. I'm sure there are potentially other local plans that may be used, and we just need you to list them and describe them in the application. As with other grant offerings, we are asking that you coordinate activities to leverage strengths and maximize efficiency and effectiveness of on-the-ground work. There is space to describe that in the application. And this message right here, you're going to see a couple of times throughout this information and guidance documents, but wells proposed in this grant offering are only for off-channel livestock water. Domestic or irrigation wells are not eligible. The list of eligible activities is here again. This is the same from the Gov delivery guidance. The only difference is that we added some information on project design, and we're asking that you follow Natural Resource Conservation Services guidelines for construction and practice standards for wells and off-channel watering facilities. Both of those are linked here as well. In addition to the eligible activities, we have a few required activities, and those include control measures to prevent water overflow, such as automatic floats and timer shutoff valves. Water must be contained in pipes to a tank or trough. A properly functioning totalizing flow meter is to be installed on the well, maintained and protected from freezing. Livestock water cannot be pumped into an open ditch or pond. And a grazing management plan is also required regardless of riparian exclusion. And that plan should include information about grazing duration, intensity, timing, and rotation for every project. Due to the legislative intent and general fund dollars being used, applicants must also document the property land ownership and describe historical livestock stream access. So you will need to include as an upload a property map outlining how livestock have stream access in the proposed project location. As I mentioned before, there is a relatively short window for implementation, so we're asking that you describe what components you think you can complete in that time frame. And a 25% match is encouraged, but we will accept applications with less match than that. This next section talks about grant cycles and grant considerations. Because of the interest in these general fund dollars being used for drought relief and the short time frame, we're requiring quarterly billing and reporting. So this should not be that cumbersome, just an update on the project status along with billing. You can always bill more frequently than quarterly, but at a minimum quarterly. And there will also be an annual post-implementation status report that will be required for 5 years after the project. This next section details the evaluation process. Grant applications are based on the evaluation criteria in the restoration grants and the evaluation process. There's a couple of bullets here on how those will be evaluated. They do align with the restoration grant administrative rules. And last down here, we're going to go into the application for a few questions, but this does have additional resources for applicants. So if you are interested and have not applied for an OWEB grant before, there is the online application guidance here, as well as video resources for a lot of the components of the grant. I think I'll stop and see if folks have any questions. I don't see any in the chat, but you're welcome to add any in there at any point in time. Wait, maybe I'm looking at the wrong one. Okay, I will. Okay, no questions yet. I'm going to move on from this to the Go Big guidance and budgeting document. And so back to the web page, this is linked here. It's the second link that you can find and go through the website to get to. I'll make this a little bit bigger. So this is a supplemental fiscal document specific to this grant offering. So this link that's listed right here will take you to the standard fiscal guidance Go Big document for all OWEB grants. And as we mentioned before, expenses and eligible costs and activities is retroactive back to July 1st of 2021. You'll have to submit the same documentation and receipts, but expenses can be submitted back to July 1. So these are differences from the regular OWEB grants that you would find in this general fiscal document. And one of those is contingencies. So contingencies up to 25% on the subtotal of contracted services and 25% on the subtotal of materials and supplies is allowed. We understand the challenges right now with implementing projects and the cost of things rising at very fast rates. And so this is to hopefully allow for changes from when you might get a bid to when project is implemented. Anything outside of 25% on those two line items will require fiscal approval, so just talk to us ahead of time. Promotional items and stakeholder engagement activities are not allowed. Wells will be reimbursed for drilling costs. And as I mentioned a couple of times, this is only for livestock wells. No irrigation or domestic wells are allowed. Both equipment purchase and rental rates are allowed expenses. Solar power or electrical hookups are also eligible costs. We are requiring, if you decide to go with electrical, to make sure that you have quotes so that we can understand it as the most cost-effective approach and really to maximize funding on the ground. Landowner time, labor, and equipment is also eligible for this. And indirect costs are being capped at 10% for these projects. If you have a federally negotiated indirect rate, any difference can be used as match. Post-grant costs, as I briefly mentioned before under reporting, are available up to $3,500. Post-implementation status reporting will be required annually for 5 years post-project. Okay, any questions on the fiscal guidance or questions on eligible expenses or what may be different for this project versus regular fiscal guidance? Okay, I don't see any questions. All right, I'm going to go to
Amy.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Renee.
It looks as though Larry has a question. Larry, can you pop the question into the chat? And then we can respond to it.
Let's see, I actually am Jim Root. I had a computer glitch and lost the invitation.
Hi, Jim.
I'm not very technically savvy. What would you like me to do?
We're actually, since you're unmuted, go ahead and ask the question. We're trying to capture things in the chat box, but go ahead and ask the question and then we can pop it in so that it's captured also in the written documentation.
Okay, thank you. My question is, I recall that the NRCS had or has a stock water program. Do you know if that's still active? And if so, if these funds could be used to supplement an NRCS grant?
Yes, definitely. As far as my understanding, those funds are active. We've talked with NRCS staff in Klamath Falls, and they do have funding available for these types of projects, and this could definitely be used as match or to supplement that funding as well.
Good, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump on over to the application. There's a couple of components here that I'd like to highlight in the application that might be different than you've seen in regular applications. And again, if you're not familiar with the OWEB application, if you go to the guidance document at the bottom, there is information to assist you with the online application, how to apply, how to work through all of these components. And so this one is under proposed solution. If you see on the left-hand side, there's a list of all of the kind of major headings for the application. And this first one under proposed solution is, we've had a question on if you can put multiple projects into one grant application. The answer to that is yes, but I really want to make sure that you outline specifics for each project in here. And so we have objectives and project activities. And so it would be really important to include things like landowner A objectives, landowner A project activities, landowner B objectives, landowner B project activities, and really detail what those are specific to each project. There are these plus buttons over on the side, if you can see those, that will allow you to add multiple objectives and project activities so that you can describe those if you are using one application for multiple projects. Another thing I'd like to highlight in here is you might see several times mentioned check the I buttons. There's this little blue I button here next to a lot of the questions. And if you can make sure to look at that, it gives you additional guidance on maybe how to answer the question or uploads that may be required. So make sure to kind of, as you work through the application, check those I buttons to see if there's any additional information. We tried as best as possible to include that in the guidance, but sometimes there's a little bit different information. So then under this wrap-up section on the left, there is a couple of considerations I'd like to go over. Project design and management. So there's 5 design requirements here that we would like to see in the application. The first one is multiple wells are allowed per landowner, but the project description must specifically articulate and justify why those are needed. And as we mentioned before, for design, we strongly encourage you to look at NRCS guidelines. Those are linked in the guidance document. They're also linked here in the blue I button. The applicant is required to use an Oregon licensed and bonded well constructor. It is recommended that you check with OWRD, the Water Resources Department. They do, you can verify with them whether a well constructor holds a current license and bond. They maintain records for all of licensed well drillers. And they also include records and information if there is a formal enforcement proceeding. So things that you might want to be aware of before contracting with a well constructor. And last one on here is the well constructor is required to comply with the statutes and rules within the Water Resources Department well construction program. This is all available online. If you have any problem finding that, just let me know. The next section under wrap up that I would like to go over is the water resources considerations. And so I mentioned this before, but as the intent of this program is to support moving livestock away from riparian areas, we're asking that you include an upload map showing livestock, historical stream access, and project components. The second one in project design, wells should provide a sufficient flow rate to support off-channel livestock watering. So we're recommending that you limit the well casing size to 6-inch maximum diameter. And then we ask you to describe a little bit more how you plan to ensure the proposed wells will only be used for livestock water. And our last one on here, which was mentioned in the required activities, but describe how the project will implement control measures to prevent excess water waste and overflow. So how will water be delivered? Needs to be piped to tanks or troughs, and then automatic float and timer shutoff valves are required, and livestock water is not to be pumped into an open ditch or pond. My third addition down here is additional provisions for cooperative or landowner agreements. So if you're familiar with OWEB process, landowner agreements are required, and they contain certain provisions in there that are always included. These are for additional provisions that we're asking that you put in your landowner agreement. This first one is a commitment from the landowner to use the well only for livestock watering, as we've mentioned multiple times, not to be for any domestic or irrigation use. The second provision is if equipment is used for purposes that are non-compliant with program intent, landowner will be required to return the equipment. The third provision is a properly functioning totalizing flow meter will be required to be installed on the well. It'll need to be maintained and protected from freezing. And then once the project is complete, the landowner will document and provide total water use to the grantee twice a year in May and November. And then that information the grantee will provide to OWEB in the annual post-implementation status report. And the last one is monitoring of the riparian area will be required. This includes annual photo points taken midsummer to early fall to show vegetation growth. And then if riparian grazing is planned, a landowner testimony will need to be included that documents the grazing timing, duration, and intensity that took place. And this will again be provided to OWEB in that annual post-implementation status report. So those were the main topics that I wanted to hit. I'm open to more questions if you guys have any. You can pop them in a chat or just raise your hand and we can get those from you. I don't see any other questions. Renee, is there anything that you would like to add any additional information?
Amy, I think you did a fantastic job covering things. The only piece that it's not adding, it's just reiterating what Amy mentioned about currently the lifespan of these dollars is through June 30th of 2023. We have noted that just given some of those challenges with well driller access in particular, that we likely would be requesting carry forward on behalf of potential applicants and grantees in terms of legislative approval for carry forward into next biennium. So we're happy to keep interested folks updated about the status of those conversations, but just wanted to underscore that piece, which Amy already touched on. It is an important consideration just given some of those challenges in accessing contractors for this program.
Thanks, Renee. Well, that was pretty short. If you have any questions at any time, please let me know. You're welcome to reach out to me by email or a phone call. As a reminder, kind of take a look at all the guidance documents, make sure to review those blue I buttons in the grant application that will help you to understand what's expected in the questions, what uploads are required. And again, feel free to reach out to me at any point with questions along the way. I think this is Jim. Is this a question or another question? You're muted, Jim, if you have.
Thank you. I did have a computer glitch and I lost the written information. If that could be sent to me, I would sure appreciate it.
Yes, I think I have your email from the registration for the Zoom webinar. Is that a good email?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And I wanted to,
yes, I can send.
Oh, thank you. And I wanted to add one observation. And that is as we also take cattle out of riparian areas, which is a very good practice. But we've found with our system, we also take them out of the irrigation ditches, which is another source of sedimentation. The cattle seem to, in our situation, prefer the troughs to irrigation delivery systems. And so anyway, one more good benefit for this program.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, because all water should be not from the well, should be piped into troughs or tanks and not into open ditches.
Yep. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I guess we'll end a little early. And again, feel free to reach out at any point in time. Thank you for your time today.